Hey, it's Tpok. I am back in true Remembrance. I'm gonna probably boost my audio right here because the rain is pretty loud. So, yeah. Back then, it was still autumn. The air was crisp, the winds were cool. It rained all day and night. On some days, the curtain of falling water was so dense that you could hardly see past your nose. I could sit for hours at a time as the rain tap danced on the roof and ran down the windows. I was never bored. But a quite different kind of tapping broke my reverie today. So someone was at my door. How unusual. I never got guests. A man I'd never seen before was standing there when I opened up. His black business suit was slick with rain. He reached into his pocket and whipped out an official-looking badge in front of my eyes before I could say a word. "Sorry to bother you, sir. Have you, by any chance, seen a suspicious-looking person around this area?" "What, other than you?" That's what I wanted to say, but he didn't look like he was joking. So I just kept my mouth shut. "I don't think so. Could you describe him for me?" "Sure." Then he brought one of his hands to about chest level, drew a line. "A young girl about this height." "Uh-huh. That's your suspicious-looking person? Not just a runaway or anything like that?" "Something like that." The man smiled a little at this and nodded. I shrugged. "Well, in any case, haven't seen anyone like that around here." "I see." The man turned and walked down the stairs. I watched him until his figure disappeared around the corner, then went back inside and closed my door. Man, talk about a close shave. "A suspicious-looking person. You've got quite a reputation," I remarked to the girl who was curled up in one corner of my room. She glared back. That was the only response she gave me. Well, that was quite enough. She looks just like La, except with black hair. Rain was dripping from her hair and clothes onto the floor. There was quite a puddle in my room now, as a matter of fact. I sighed and I walked toward her. She shrunk back at my approach. Now she was backed up against the wall with no place to go, with that glare superglued on her face the whole time. Great. What did she think she was, a frightened kitten? She surely was acting like one. "Don't worry, you're safe. It's just that you can't stay in that corner forever." My floor, well, at least that one patch of it, was slick with moisture by now. She must have been out in the rain for hours. Besides, she was shaking right now. Obviously, that was from the cold as much from the fear. "You're just going to catch a cold like that, you know." I tossed a towel in her direction, but she didn't so much as move a muscle to pick it up. She just kept glaring at me, so I just kept glaring back. She'd been like this ever since I found her. I found her huddled in the alleyway behind this apartment complex about an hour ago. I took her and immediately hid her, as it was obvious that the officials were after her. I had no love for the investigative bureaus, you see, and I really had no tolerance for the black-suited goons. Anyway, yeah, ever since I took her in, she hadn't really moved a muscle. No gratitude, no explanation, not a single word from her mouth. And I was starting to get really fed up with this stalemate. So I walked right up to her, and knelt so I could reach her. Before she could so much as try to bolt, I covered her hair with the towel and started drying her off, roughly. She let out an unearthly shriek and screwed her eyes shut. The towel was quickly soaked through and through. Just how long had she been out there anyway? Anyway, this towel was toast now. I tossed it into my laundry basket and sighed again. "That thing's gonna mold. You should have hung that up to dry." She just kept glaring at me. Now she couldn't have intimidated a mouse if she tried, and I certainly didn't care that much anyway, but this was kind of getting depressing. So I shrugged and ran my fingers gently through her hair. "Don't be afraid now. and I continued to brush her hair. It was like petting a frightened kitten, really. This was completely unlike me. I could feel the tension leaving her body, little by little. Now she was cautiously opening her eyes again. And now she was staring timidly up at me, so I withdrew my hand. Feeling a little better now. Then would you mind telling me why they're after you? The girl just shook her head silently. She didn't know then. Either that or she was lying, but I really didn't think so. No reason, eh? Or maybe they found you so fetching that they decided to stalk you. I shrugged lightly, but the girl didn't seem to get it. She cocked her head to one side and stared at me blankly. I smiled at this. She blinked. Once, twice, and smiled right back. Okay, let's see now. It doesn't look like you've got the dollar. And if I were to send you to HQ, they'd just lock you up. No point in sending her right into the arms of her would-be captors after all. While I was thinking about what to do next, the girl quietly reached out. There was a sheet of paper in her hands. It was soggy and almost falling apart, so she'd been holding it the entire time. But fortunately, I could still make out what it was. "This is my address, isn't it?" I murmured. I was starting to get a really bad feeling about this. The girl, on the other hand, looked about as surprised as I was. Her eyes kept flitting between the paper and my face. "So you were told to come here, and you got lost, is that it?" She looked up at me timidly. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then she nodded. Oh great, this wasn't good. I dropped the paper onto the floor, screwed my eyes tightly shut, and put my head in my hands. I was starting to get a headache. I'd seen this handwriting before. I knew whose it was. Snaky consonants, half-finished vowels, carelessly slashed out punctuation. This had to be Anol's doing. So this was one of Anol's underlings, then. I mean, I suppose this could have been a niece or even a granddaughter, except I knew that he didn't have any family. When I opened my eyes again, I found her staring down at the paper, looking worried indeed. "Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to kick you out. You can stay here until Anol comes. That is, if you want to." The girl looked lost in thought for a second, then she bowed deeply. I guess this was her way of saying thank you very much. Alright. Let's see. You might want to take a shower now. You're soaked after all. Can you stand? The girl nodded. When she got to her feet, my mouth fell open. I stared at her until I realized what I was doing. I quickly averted my gaze soon thereafter. She was wearing almost nothing. I hadn't really noticed it up until now because she'd been huddled off in the corner like that. And when I said almost nothing, I meant she was wearing what hardly amounted to more than underwear. If there was any silver lining here to be found, it was that I hadn't been slapped to death yet. Tell me, did you bring any other clothes? The girl stared back at me for a second. Her head tilted to one side in thought. Then she pointed a little bag sitting in the other corner of the room. So that was all the luggage she had, huh? The bag was so small that I doubted there was anything of worth inside it, let alone clothing. I see. Talk about a hopeless situation here. The girl just stared up at me. Clearly she had no idea what was going on. Well, first things first. Might as well show her to the bathroom. I beckoned to her. She followed. I opened the door to the bathroom and gently pushed her inside. She offered no resistance. Feel free to use whatever you like. I'm leaving some towels here. I have to go somewhere in a moment now. I'll lock the door behind me. If someone knocks or buzzes, don't answer, okay? And with that, I walked back towards the foyer. I could hear loud crashing noises behind me when I left my apartment. Was she going to be alright? Well, hopefully she hadn't tripped or fallen on anything. I boarded the trolley and got off on 6th Street. Then I started looking around for some clothing my unexpected guest could wear. But, well, I didn't know much about this. I was totally lost. What was I supposed to do here? No, I was being picky. I didn't care whether she liked what I bought or not. But still, anyway, it didn't take long for me to go, oh, to hell with this, and after that I started buying complete outfits off mannequin displays, whatever it took. I headed back to the station in the rain, and wondered if she'd finished showering by now. Well, I was probably worrying a bit much. After all, anyone who was her age wouldn't have any problem doing that by herself, right? She'd never used my particular bathroom before, but come on. Yeah, she'd be fine. The only thing I knew was this girl was weird. And one of Anol's acquaintances on top of that. I'd have to be on my best behavior with her, otherwise Anol was going to have my hide afterwards. 3 years had passed, almost to the hour, since I'd first met the man. It was raining heavily that day, kind of like how it was right now. I just received my license to practice in town, and indeed I'd also just received my first assignment. In short, I was a newly minted Mnemonicide in every sense of the word. I finally had what I'd fought so hard for. A comfortable job, a steady income, a roof over my head, food on the table. Yet now that it was all mine, everything felt so empty. So I found myself in the back alleys of 5th Street, sitting under the eaves of a building and listening to the rain fall. It was a nice sound. I could have listened to it forever, and I would have, if not for the approaching footsteps. I had no idea what to make of this. No one came around these parts on sunny days, let alone rainy days like this. I raised my eyes anyhow. When I did, I saw an old man standing before me. He smiled at me and said, "A pity, so sad, so young, yet ready to kill himself. Tell you what, maybe this will cheer you up. I'll give you this here gun. Kill me first, then turn it on yourself." I looked, and dear God, he really was holding a gun out to me. It didn't look like he was joking either. Now this was interesting. Interesting indeed, so I laughed a bit. "And who are you?" He smiled right back. He seemed harmless enough, but there was something in his eyes that put an end to my laughter immediately. "Anol, that's my name. A pleasure. Blackiris." I recognized this name. Rather, I would have been an idiot not to have. Most of the books in the Academy's considerable library were written by him or someone with his exact name. "You're trying to tell me you're the so-called Alpha of Omegas?" I'd never have imagined. But tell me, why do you know my name? "Come now, routine lookup, nothing to it." He winked at me and smiled. Obviously someone like him would have access to every file in HQ, including mine. "I know everything. Where you were born, how you survived, how you became a Mnemonicide. It's all there, in the file. You really ought to look. Always nice to know that Big Brother is watching." Obviously I wanted to avoid being reminded of my past. But when I turned to glare at him, I saw the most amazing thing on his face. His eyes were red. His cheeks were slick and heavy with the weight of tears. So I did the only thing I could do in that situation. I stared. A few seconds passed. Anol looked at me with puzzlement written all over his face, but finally he realized what was up. "Oh, my apologies. No use watching an old man cry. Waste of time. Don't mind me. I'll be fine." He wiped his eyes dry and smiled at me reassuringly. But I wasn't reassured at all. This guy was weird. It was only later that I realized that he'd saved me in his own way. If it hadn't been for him, I probably would have never left that alley alive. Seriously? Anol dropped by my apartment every once in a while after that incident. It was never for any special occasion. He just came, talked about this and that, and then disappeared as suddenly as he arrived. He didn't say much, but it became rapidly obvious that he was always under surveillance. No wonder his stays with me were so short. For my part, I didn't think this was all that unusual. After all, Omegas were so rare they might as well have been living national treasures. Well, if there was anything unusual about this whole thing, it was Anol himself. I'd known all along that he was weird, yeah, but still, I never realized that he was a freaking pedophile. What? Or something like that. And now I was getting depressed. What the hell did he expect me to do with that girl in my apartment? Oh, that's how he's a pedophile. Okay, that was kind of out of the blue there. The girl was out of the shower when I came back home. That was good. Except she'd gone back to cowering in a corner, so that wasn't so good. She was drying her hair, at least. She jumped in surprise when she saw me enter, but she slowly relaxed when she realized who it was. Here, these are for you, I said as I handed over, I just punched my microphone, the bag of clothes. The sales clerk had gift wrapped it nicely despite my protestations, and I'd been too nonplussed, to really argue. Everything went quiet, so quiet in fact that I swore I could hear the girl blink. Then timidly, she took the bag. She inspected it carefully, skimming her fingers across every surface. Apparently it was to her liking, because then she started opening it up. She carefully undid the ribbon and gingerly worried the tape off the wrapping paper. After neatly folding the wrapping paper and setting it aside, she reached into the bag and pulled out a white one-piece dress. There was something akin to shock in her eyes when she looked up at me. I'm not sure if it'll fit on you, but please, go ahead. Her eyes flitted towards me, then back to the dress. When she turned to me again, there was a hesitant smile on her lips. Sure, it was only for a second, but it was the first real smile I'd seen from her, cause enough for relief. At the same time, her obvious happiness over the clothes made me feel a little guilty that I'd spent so little time and effort picking it out. Oh, if you want to change, you should go in there. I pointed to the bathroom. The girl nodded happily, scooped up the dress, and ran off. Interesting. I'd never seen her so animated before. Finally, I get to see Blackiris. I still don't know what Anol looks like. I sat back and opened up the book I'd been reading. She is just like La. Literally, just cut her hair there and dye it a whitish blue. And that's La. I hadn't gotten that far when I heard the sound of the bathroom door opening. Did it fit? Not too big or small? All she did in response was to bow deeply. Her way of saying thank you, probably. I went back to reading. She, on the other hand, started to explore my apartment on her own. It didn't take her long. My place was pretty small. Eventually, she came back and sat at my feet. She really was quiet about it, so quiet that I didn't even notice her come back in. That, and I was too absorbed in the book by then. So the next time I looked up, I was surprised to find her staring at me. She quickly averted her gaze when I stared back at her. Over the course of the next hour or so, this kept happening. The third time around, I finally let out a sigh and said to her, "You want to read something too?" She shrunk away from me for a second, but then she nodded almost imperceptibly. Well, all my books are on that shelf over there. You're welcome to read any one you want. She remained still for a minute or two, but curiosity finally got the better of her, and she walked over to where all my books were. She came running back seconds later, with my biggest book in her hands. I had to wonder whether she'd really get anything out of reading something like that, but I didn't say a word. She started flipping through the pages, an intense and earnest expression rippling through her face. She was obviously interested in the subject matter, and I was obviously interested in her mannerisms. Anyway, it'd be rude to interrupt her, so I held my peace. The next time I looked up from my book, it was already dark out. How long had we been at this? This was a good time to make dinner as any. After all, I was starved. She looked up from her book with a questioning expression on her face. "Oh, don't mind me." To which she nodded and returned to her book. I went to the kitchen. There was still some soup left over from lunch. I heated that up a bit, poured generous portions into 2 cups, and sliced up some bread. Then I put everything on a tray along with some spoons and carried it all into the living room. "Go ahead and eat whenever you get hungry, okay?" I put the tray down next to her. She turned to me and nodded, but she went straight back to her book after that. She was obviously too engrossed to be interested in anything else at that moment. And for me, well, I was pleased that someone would find one of my books to be so fascinating, which was why I picked up my cup and went from reading my book to watching her full time. The moon was high in the night sky by now. My guest was obviously having a hard time keeping awake. Her eyes were drooping, and she started nodding off, only to snap back awake every so often. And, this will probably sound horrible, but I found this kind of amusing. It wasn't long before she was sound asleep on the floor, curled up in a ball. Not that I blamed her. She'd had an action-packed day, after all. She'd been chased around town without knowing what was going on, and then she'd ended up in the care of a total stranger. She hadn't complained the entire time. I was proud of her. So I scooped her up, gently, so she wouldn't wake, and tucked her into my bed. Then I brought the book she'd been reading and set it by that pillow. After that was all done, I sat back in my chair and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Soon enough, I heard the stamp of footsteps coming up the stairs, and then a loud knock on the door. I had been expecting this. I opened up, and sure enough, Anol was standing there. "Hey, there he is." "Good evening. Tell me, has seen a stray kitten lately? A cute one?" He asked with one of those good-natured, dirty old man grins that I'd hated with a vengeance. So I glared before I let him in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, pointing in the direction of the bed. But Anol did not answer me. Instead, he kept staring at the sleeping girl with tender warmth in his eyes. "Now, I am your guest, am I not? Have some tea for me, or something." Great. Didn't look like I had a choice in the matter, so I put some coffee on. I handed him a cup, and he took it and started drinking greedily. Only after he'd finished his first cup and had a refill in his hands did he start talking. "Was busy today, couldn't go check up on her, so I had her come down to your place. Trusted you wouldn't kick her out. You didn't. Good. However, never pegged you for a pedophile. Hands off. Clear?" "Clear." Anol nodded. He seemed positively relieved for some reason. Is this your daughter or your granddaughter?" "No, no blood relation. I just look after her, because. At your place? No. Too much surveillance around my suite at HQ. The old church, the basement, she lives there. No one will find her that way." I looked over to our sleeping beauty with new respect. She'd been living there, all alone. That was crazy. Reading? He discovered the book on the pillow when he drew near the bed. He looked down at the title page for a minute and then said, "Difficult, this book, highly technical, more likely to give you a headache than any enjoyment. Better this than one of the books you wrote, thank you very much." And she really was reading this. Looked like she was enjoying it a great deal, as a matter of fact. Well, guys, I was honestly expecting it to end, like, soon. So I was gonna, because it was like, chapter 7, and it was like something to do with the end, and I was like, okay, it's gonna end soon. But looks like it hasn't, so I'm gonna stop it here and pick it up next time. Looks like this is a flashback. I'm assuming that girl's name is Maria, or whatever Dexter said, to Blackiris in the hospital, or whatever. So, yeah, we finally get to meet Anol and Maria, I think, and, yeah, pretty good. So, thanks for watching.